where Downey Jr. pointed out to both Marvel and Disney that this could not only ruin his reputation, but also cost him fans, and he's against making those statements. However, both Bob and Kevin informed him that taking part in these types of statements and the press tour for Ironheart is built into his very expensive contract for the future of the MCU, mostly related to the return in Avengers Doomsday. RDJ is already challenging both Bob Iger and Kevin Feige that he will only make statements defending Ironheart and Riri Williams if it avoids arguments about DEI.
Yeah, and it's like the real Tony Stark gets like back somehow, and there's like a moment where she's flying through and he's like, "Who is that?" And she's like, "I'm Ironheart, Mr. Stark." And he's like, "I like that girl." And then he like goes to do something else. Like that would be like the level of something that I think would possibly happen.
It started with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. In a lighthearted Ironheart press interview, Robert Downey Jr. cracked a joke. But if you looked closely, something was off. The quick glance to the side, the forced laugh, it wasn't the charming Tony Stark swagger fans knew so well. What the cameras didn't catch was the storm brewing behind the scenes. According to insiders, just days before that appearance, Downey had been on a tense video call with Disney and Marvel executives. Voices were raised, promises were questioned, and when the call ended, one thing was clear. Robert Downey Jr., the man who built the Marvel Cinematic Universe from the ground up, was done playing along.
That they also had Robert Downey Jr. and they had him roll out and really kind of prop the show up and prop the character of Riri Williams up above Tony Stark and really tried to really have him really as the face of the Ironheart press tour, and it really just backfired completely.
This wasn't about salary disputes or scheduling conflicts. This was about principle, about a legacy he'd spent over a decade crafting, now being leveraged for a project he didn't believe in. Executives wanted him to step in, smile for the cameras, and defend a show that was collapsing under the weight of own hype. They expected him to be the MCU's golden savior one more time.
Bob and Kevin refused, and they are forcing him to make statements to go against Marvel fans that are opposed to the Riri Williams character. Now, RDJ is also very annoyed with Marvel and Disney after they initially forced him to do PR and become a part of the press tour, since it was built into his contract for Doomsday, with the show.
But instead, RDJ did the unthinkable. He refused. Not politely, not with Hollywood diplomacy, but with blunt, unfiltered honesty. And that refusal set off a chain reaction that could derail Marvel's biggest comeback plan yet. Because when Iron Man says no, the whole empire feels it. It began with a single interview clip that spread across social media like wildfire. RDJ was sitting beside the cast of Ironheart fielding casual questions when he made a half-joking comment about being replaced as Dr. Doom. On the surface, it was harmless banter, but fans replayed the moment again and again, pointing out the tight jaw, the split-second grimace. Something wasn't right. Behind that awkward smile was a private confrontation few knew about at the time.
I recall when they forced Robert Downey Jr., they made a deal with him to take part in the press tour to prop up Riri Williams, played by Dominique Thorne, on multiple talk show programs out there, a lot of which were, of course, affiliated with Disney. We'll talk more about that down the road. However, this is where it gets really intense, because we know that Robert Downey Jr. is a very busy man right now. He is heavily involved with Avengers Doomsday.
Sources claim that only days earlier, Downey had engaged in a heated virtual meeting with Marvel President Kevin Feige and Disney CEO Bob Iger. Their mission: convince, some say pressure, him into taking on a larger role in Ironheart's promotional push. This wasn't a simple "can you help us out" request. It was a demand. They wanted him to not only appear alongside the cast, but to publicly address the growing backlash against the series, framing fan criticism as rooted in sexism and toxicity. For RDJ, this crossed a line. He had spent years earning the trust of Marvel's audience, and now they wanted him to scold that very fan base in defense of a show he wasn't invested in.
going out there from the media that you are just a racist if you don't like Ironheart. The reason it's getting this backlash, the reason it's getting bad reviews, the reason that fans don't like what they see, it's just because all the damn racists out there, Jay.
When he refused, the fallout was immediate. Scheduled appearances were quietly pulled. Internal emails warned of talent non-compliance. And just like that, the most trusted face in the MCU was at odds with the very studio he helped turn into a box office juggernaut. When Ironheart was first announced, Marvel billed it as the natural heir to Tony Stark's legacy. A fresh, younger genius ready to pick up where Iron Man left off.
Now, already Robert Downey Jr. is enraged with both Disney and Marvel, as well as Marvel fans. Already Bob Iger and Kevin Feige held a recent emergency call/meeting that included Robert Downey Jr. remotely, where they were pressuring him to make a wide statement to Marvel fans to stop criticizing Riri Williams and to also mirror. Now, already
Early press releases called it the Spiritu, successor to Iron Man, and industry insiders predicted it would be a streaming powerhouse. But once it hit Disney Plus, reality came crashing in. The numbers told a brutal story. Viewers tuned in for the first episode but didn't stick around. Internal reports described a completion collapse, fans starting episodes and abandoning them halfway through. Social media chatter turned sour. The hashtags meant to hype the show became rallying points for criticism, memes, and outright rejection. Critics in the media praised its representation and messaging, but that disconnect only seemed to fuel the backlash.
Like, are people, is this like North Korea? Are people required to like your woke garbage? Here we go. They're now removing reviews, scrubbing reviews from Rotten Tomatoes. Look at this. This was how it started out here at 32%, and now they're deleting the reviews. Rotten Tomatoes right here, and now at.
Fans weren't objecting to diversity. They were frustrated by what they saw as thin writing, rushed world building, and a character pushed as a replacement instead of being developed on her own terms. For Disney, it wasn't just another underperforming series. It was a reputational crisis. Executives scrambled to salvage the situation, doubling marketing budgets, staging press events, searching for a big-name savior to turn the narrative around. That's when all eyes turned to Robert Downey Jr. If Iron Man himself vouched for Ironheart, maybe fans would give it another chance. But they were about to learn that RDJ wasn't willing to be their corporate safety net. Since Endgame, Robert Downey Jr. had stayed mostly silent about the MCU's new direction.
Iger, Kevin Feige, and even Dominique Thorne heading into complete damage control to really take control of the situation, and so far that has worked to no avail. Well, this is exactly what's been going on now, to the point where Bob Iger and Kevin Feige are getting involved in a lot of drama with RDJ, Robert Downey Jr.
Publicly, he played the role of the proud alum, but privately, he was watching with growing unease. He'd seen Eternals leave audiences confused. Thor, Love and Thunder turn a once majestic hero into a punchline, and the Marvels stumble into box office disaster. Still, he kept his opinions close to the chest until Ironheart. This wasn't just another Marvel misstep. For Downey, it felt like a direct challenge to Tony Stark's legacy. His character's death in Endgame wasn't just a plot point. It was a cultural moment, the emotional peak of a 22-film saga. That sacrifice had weight. It was sacred ground. Now, Marvel was asking him to help legitimize what many fans saw as a rushed replacement, one that hadn't earned the right to carry Iron Man's mantle. RDJ wasn't against Riri Williams or actress Dominique Thorne. In fact, he reportedly admired her talent. His issue was with the way the studio was forcing her into the spotlight without letting audiences form a natural connection. To him, it wasn't about diversity. It was about authenticity. Marvel was trying to graft a legacy onto a character instead of letting her build her own. And worse, They wanted him to be the public face of that push, knowing full well that his word still carried enormous influence with fans. That's when his patience began to crack. At first, the deal sounded simple. Downey would lend his star power to Ironheart's rollout with a few light promotional appearances, smile for the cameras, say a few encouraging words, and drop a subtle tease about his rumored return in Avengers Doomsday. It was framed as a win-win. Help a new hero get her footing while stoking excitement for Marvel's next big event. But somewhere between handshake and execution, the terms shifted. According to insiders, Disney and Marvel execs, Bob Iger and Kevin Feige among them, pushed for far more than RDJ had agreed to. Suddenly, he wasn't just doing interviews. He was expected to defend Ironheart against fan criticism, address accusations of sexism in the audience, and effectively reframe the show's reception as a battle against bigotry. For RDJ, this wasn't promotion, it was a trap. A clause buried in his multi-film return deal reportedly gave the studio the power to compel PR appearances. They were using it to the fullest, turning his comeback into a bargaining chip. When he pushed back, warning that publicly lecturing fans could damage his reputation, execs reminded him that supporting Ironheart was in his contract. What they saw as brand management, he saw as a scripted guilt trip, and that's when the conversation stopped being polite. The turning point came during a high-stakes virtual meeting with Kevin Feige and Bob Iger. By this point, weeks of quiet back and forth had boiled over into open frustration. RDJ had already fulfilled his original Ironheart commitments, but the studio wanted more. More appearances, more praise, more public defense of the series. Sources say the call started diplomatically, but it didn't stay that way. Execs pressed him on the importance of controlling the narrative, warning that silence would be misinterpreted by the media. Then came the ask: stand in front of the cameras and call out the fan base's toxic criticism. Downey's response was immediate and sharp. Don't ask me to lie to fans. For him, this wasn't about politics or PR. It was about trust. The audience had carried him through his darkest career years, embraced his redemption arc, and made Tony Stark a cinematic legend. He wasn't about to turn around and shame them for not liking a show. When Feige and Iger pushed again, insiders described Downey as dropping the Hollywood filter entirely. No rehearsed lines, no charm, just raw frustration. He flat out refused to be Marvel's corporate fire extinguisher. The call ended without resolution, but with one undeniable reality: Robert Downey Jr. was no longer playing by Disney's rules. If you ask industry insiders, RDJ's standoff with Marvel wasn't an isolated case. It was part of a much bigger pattern. When a major Disney project underperforms, the next step is almost predictable. First, the criticism is reframed as prejudice. Then, a beloved actor is sent out to deliver the message. Finally, the studio rallies its media allies to repeat the narrative until it sticks. We've seen it before. When The Last Jedi split Star Wars fans, detractors were labeled as clinging to toxic masculinity. When Obi-Wan Kenobi faced backlash, Ewan McGregor publicly condemned misogynistic fan responses, right on cue with Disney's PR cycle. When Lightyear disappointed at the box office, the conversation shifted to blaming homophobia rather than addressing the storytelling. In each case, the criticism, whether fair or not, was painted in the broadest, most inflammatory strokes. And in each case, the actor delivering that message risked alienating part of their own fan base. With Ironheart, Disney appeared ready to run the same play, except this time, their chosen spokesperson wasn't just another cast member. He was the face of the MCU itself. RDJ knew the weight his words carried, and he also knew the damage they could do if they weren't his own. By refusing to follow the script, he wasn't just protecting himself. He was breaking Disney's pattern in real time. Marvel's ace in the hole was Avengers Doomsday, the long-awaited event film set to bring RDJ back in some capacity. Leaks and fan theories had already sent hype into overdrive, with speculation about multiverse variants and resurrected heroes. Disney knew his return would be a billion-dollar headline, but that leverage went both ways. For months, the studio dangled Doomsday as both an incentive and a threat. Help us save Ironheart now, and we'll make your grand MCU comeback everything it should be. Push back, and those plans might suddenly change direction. It was a gamble. Downey wasn't desperate for the paycheck or the spotlight. His post-Marvel career had given him creative freedom and financial security. What mattered to him was how his return would be remembered. And in his eyes, tying it to a PR cleanup job for Ironheart would tarnish the entire moment before it even happened. For Robert Downey Jr., this was never just about one show. It was about the story he'd leave behind. Tony Stark's arc had ended on a perfect note, a sacrifice that cemented his place in pop culture history. Any return, even in a multiverse twist, needed to feel earned, not transactional. Walking into Ironheart's controversy as Marvel's cleanup crew would blur that legacy. Fans wouldn't see Iron Man returning for an epic new chapter. They'd see him dragged back to sell a struggling spin-off. And once that perception set in, it would be almost impossible to undo. So he made his choice. RDJ would protect the integrity of his character, even if it meant clashing with the studio that made him a global icon. In an industry where most stars play along to keep the peace, he was willing to risk everything for the story that mattered most, his own. And Marvel? They'd have to decide if Doomsday could happen without its most important Avenger.